So, my name's Alex Bleasdale. I manage the support team in EMEA. I've been working with MarkLogic for about 8 years, and we have quite a lot of cloud customers. It's been a really popular feature, and in the time that I've been working with MarkLogic, we've had a lot of people using, particularly AWS. But we're now, with MarkLogic 9, we're looking at opening up Azure support as well. So this presentation is going to cover what we've already got in terms of our offerings for AWS, give you a bit of insight into how it works, the features otherwise known as managed cluster feature, and we're going to also look a bit at what we're bringing to the table with Azure as well, with MarkLogic 9. So, okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick high-level overview of the agenda here. So we're going to talk a bit about MarkLogic in the cloud, our current offerings, and then we're going to dive into AWS, Azure. I'm going to do a quick demo of Azure, using Azure with the cloud, and then we'll come back to wrap up with Q&A as we go along. So as you probably heard from any of the keynote speeches, or both the keynote speeches, we are looking at trying to promote cloud neutrality quite heavily. Here we've got an example of 3 major cloud providers, but obviously there are a large number of them that you can go with. From MarkLogic's point of view, you can really run on any. There are a lot of features that are already built into the product that would allow you to harness cloud technology, and I think by virtue of its own architecture, it lends itself very, very well to being deployed on cloud environments. So we'll cover that in a bit more detail later on. So one of the questions that's come up a lot is, not so much why, but how. There are obviously motivations. There are risks involved. There are quite severe risks with vendor lock-in, particularly with some of the databases that are provided by the various separate providers. There are, of course, always issues with security. There are also concerns about training. Getting your head around dealing with cloud infrastructure, I think, is quite a big leap when you're moving from physical hardware and understanding how that works. A lot of us have got a lot of experience with physical hardware to moving to start thinking about what that looks like in a virtualized environment. When you start thinking about the data center as it turns into this virtualized machine that you don't really have any control over. But of course, there are also motivations as well, scaling back and consolidating IT, the flexibility that you get from a DevOps paradigm where you can spin up instances very quickly, you can run build servers that deploy to different cloud platforms, you can have applications that run for a very short period of time, and all of those things lend themselves to positive motivations and give you good reasons to want to consider moving to the cloud. So, let's move on to cloud offerings briefly. We've had 7+ years of cloud success now. As I said, AWS is certainly one of the big features that we've worked with, and I'm very much excited about the work we're doing for Azure now in MarkLogic 9 as well. We're offering full support for those who've used AWS. We've been offering heavy support for AWS for a long time. We're now also expanding that out to embracing Azure as well. So our support team are committed to helping with. Pardon? Google Cloud, we have customers that are using it. We're not offering direct support right now. Oh, brilliant. Okay. Okay. Perfect example. We're not doing any support for it primarily, but in most cases, there's very little difference between using one cloud vendor and another. The problems are almost always the same. I'll kind of give you a bit of a flavor of that as I go through the slide deck. But we will help you with whatever platform you choose to use as much as we can do. Most of the problems that often come up, though, are quite often infrastructural, unfortunately, like it's network issues or it's hardware issues and so on. And in a virtualized environment, often the onus is more on the user and the provider. We can certainly provide a lot of expertise from the MarkLogic point of view, and we're pretty good at network debugging and general other troubleshooting as well. So yes, Google Cloud is something that customers, much like yourself, are using. It's something that I would imagine more and more customers will be using over time, and it will be something that I would imagine we'll be gradually phasing in more support for as well. So, MarkLogic, I think we can say after 7+ years of this that we're designed and tested for success in the cloud. We've got a really good track record, I think, of deployment and very, very successful deployments and successful applications running in production on the cloud. Generally speaking, though, as I said, cloud neutrality is a big thing in this particular conference this year. One of the most important things that I think is worth mentioning here is a lot of the features that MarkLogic offers you are features that lend themselves very well for the cloud, even though they weren't necessarily built for cloud environments. So we do have things like S3 support on the one hand, and now support for elastic load balancers with things like the data movement SDK, MLCP being able to work with load balancers effectively. And we also have new features as well, such as rolling upgrades. We've had HADR for quite a long time, good few years now. Tiered storage can work with storage systems on-prem, but it also works very well with different grades of storage in the cloud as well. The manageability APIs and security, of course, are completely cloud-neutral features. So I'm going to cover AWS briefly. We're going to look a bit at the managed clusters feature. Has anyone used AWS with MarkLogic so far? Has anyone deployed MarkLogic on AWS in this room? OK, great. Has anyone used the CloudFormation templates to do this? OK. Interesting. OK, so we're going to cover it from the sort of the top level down in that case. We offer on AWS we offer a downloadable image that you can use. This is an OS plus the MarkLogic install itself. This is the storefront for AWS Marketplace, and those are the choices of images you've got. In this case, you've got MarkLogic 7, 8, and 9 available. There's a downloadable AMI that you can deploy. One of the things that we want to try and highlight with this is the bit that we provision and the bit that we offer is this part here. We're not a fully managed service, although we do offer a great deal of support and help for getting your system up and running and maintaining it. The piece that we offer is just an AMI, and the AMI is the OS, in this case Amazon Linux, and then it's the install of whatever version of MarkLogic Server you happen to be using. It's not a platform that we manage as such, but I think the features that, particularly with MarkLogic 9, offer you, we do offer a very compelling case for a system that manages itself pretty well once you've got it up and running and you've got your application working well. So I talked a bit about the CloudFormation templates, and all of this leads into a feature that we call managed clusters. And as you can see here, you've got the image of the velodrome on the left here, at least to my mind. And the idea here is that you can run within a managed environment very carefully, in a very constrained and easy to manage environment using managed clusters. But you don't have to do that. We've offered you these hooks, and I can give you a bit of insight into what those are. You can also go and style it yourself. You can install an operating system yourself and run MarkLogic on it. And there's no problem with doing this either. You will have to do a bit more work, but that will lend itself to further flexibility further down the line. So, the managed cluster feature. We have the architecture of MarkLogic and the components, some of which I mentioned earlier on, and then you've got the infrastructure that AWS provides as well. We've also got our troubleshooting support, and then we've also got the managed cluster architecture itself. MarkLogic itself has we have a number of regions for AWS. MarkLogic itself will manage, in a managed environment, will manage the qualified domain names for you. It will also manage the placement of your data on EBS volumes. If an instance comes down or is paused, another one can be brought up and reconfigured, and your data will be immediately mounted. All of this stuff is managed if you're using the managed clusters feature. If you don't use those, you need to make sure that you're responsible for the mounting of data yourself. There are a number of key components that are offered on AWS. User data and EBS volumes and DynamoDB are probably the three that we're going to look at the most in this. But then you've got other pieces as well, like the auto-scaling groups that we referred to earlier on. The auto-scaling group acts as a sort of watchdog, a guarantee that if the instance goes down, it will then bring up another AWS instance and join the cluster for you. So as you can see here, AWS offers you a lot of different components, many of which we use with the managed cluster feature that we provide in our templates. But user data, EBS volumes, and DynamoDB, they're the pieces that you really need to use if you want to have the instances managed carefully and safely. Because a lot of people aren't fully aware of what the managed cluster features are, we wanted to put this slide deck together to give you some more insight into what you're actually getting from us and what you can tune yourself and configure. So you've got the user data. These are all stored in they're all passed into a configuration file. So when the image comes up, it will grab the information from the database itself, and then it will configure itself using mlcmd.conf. We have a tool called mlcmd, which is the scripts and components for managing MarkLogic server itself. And then there's also a debug file as well, stored in var temp mlcmd.trace. MarkLogic itself does not offer you any other features for managing the state of the system itself. While you do have things like the features within AWS that allow you to do that, MarkLogic itself doesn't have an agent that watches the process as it runs on the cloud. That's something that you would be expected to manage within your application. The user data variables, these are all documented pretty well in our EC2 guide. But these are kind of the main ones that are most important for user data. So name, MDB type, host details, cluster name, and so on. As an instance comes up under a managed cluster, these values will automatically be inherited so that the system can bootstrap itself and log itself in and join the network for you, join the cluster for you. There are challenges, of course. You do need to have some virtualization experience. We had a lot of problems getting our heads around the movement and the nomenclature between dealing with hardware on the one hand and then moving to the virtualization of hardware, virtualization of storage and everything else. It's kind of a bizarre move, I think, to move from hardware to something that isn't quite tangential and is a little bit more flexible. That lends itself to questions around sizing as well. I think there are a lot of advantages with cloud provisioned infrastructure for this. And then there's certainly the opportunity for you to look at, if you wish to, the possibility of dynamic scaling, dynamically adding evaluator nodes to your cluster, for example, to service requests when you've got a large flow of traffic. The other challenges, of course, which probably are not surprising, are your existing CM tools that you're using to provision a cluster, how you integrate those, and that's kind of something that we don't really offer much prescriptive advice on. We kind of allow you to use the infrastructure that you have on the understanding that you're going to figure out how to plumb it in yourselves. And then also this getting your head around the troubleshooting and monitoring from the point of view of the managed cluster feature itself. I'd like to give you an example from one of our recent support cases. This one I think is quite a useful one because I think it gives you an idea that it really is, although it's a cloud-specific example, the solution is fairly cloud-neutral, really, in a lot of ways. We're dealing with a 3-node cluster here, and the data volume's managed on an EBS volume. In this case, they started running out of space. The solution was pretty simple in this case. We increased the size of an EBS volume, add another EBS volume, and then remount it, and you're done, basically. There's nothing really about this solution that's specific to AWS. It's something that any DevOps person would have come up with or dealt with at some point. The issue is disk space. Same deal with the cloud, really, in a lot of ways. We have a knowledge base article on this, changing the size of EBS volumes attached to AWS EC2 instances. There are countless other examples like this, by the way. Most of the issues that I've dealt with, I think, have probably been network-related. Network or just not knowing where volumes are after they've been remounted. That's if you're not using the managed cluster feature. So I'm going to run through some quick takeaways on this. We have issues with network security that are concerns, if you like. Issues with training. I think as you're moving into a cloud environment or cloud infrastructure, there is a level of training that needs to go with it. Adopting new knowledge of understanding how virtualization works, and then making sure you've got a grip of what's going on at the network level with the particular deployment that you're using. You've got your issues such as continuous integration and deployment. I think this is something that lends itself very well to any cloud provider, really. The fact that you can spin up instances very quickly and very effectively, do some testing, deploy your application, run tests on it, and then clear it afterwards. The existing provisioning tools that you can use, we offer CloudFormation templates right now, but there's nothing to stop you from using the managed cluster features alongside things like Terraform. And there are obviously other limitations that we could cover as well, looking at scalability. We talked about adding nodes. If you have a set group for eNodes, you can certainly add more hosts to that. But then you've got other issues for managing, say, if you want to add more data. We offer rebalancing for that. but it isn't an automatic process that happens out of the box. It's something you need to think through fairly carefully, and certainly something that support can help with. So one of the big questions, and the reasons for this slide deck, is whether you want to use the features that we've provided already, or whether you want to just roll your own, install an OS and install MarkLogic on it. Customers have certainly done both over time. Many have found the provision that we have for the templates is not quite what they're after, so they've gone and rolled their own environment. And we cover both, and we support both within my team. Okay, so I'd now like to cover MarkLogic on Azure. This is new with MarkLogic 9. Very, very excited about this one, because I think after having worked with AWS for so long, it's very nice to have another cloud provider that we're going to enjoy working with. And I think Azure's great. I really do, based on what I've seen so far of it. So I've put together a quick demo of deploying MarkLogic on Azure. I'm just going to run through this now to give you a flavor of what Azure looks like. So I'm logging into portal.azure.com here. You can see here that I have all of my current resources available on the left-hand panel here. I'm going to create a new panel, and I'm just going to run a quick search here. In this case, I'm searching for MarkLogic. And much like the slide that we saw for AWS, we've now got our MarkLogic instances also on Azure as well. There's the bring your own license spiel here, and then there's some useful links, and then we can go on and click create. Run through the basic settings. In this case, I'm putting in a username, the name, and then adding a password for authentication. We'll speed that up by adding those in there. And then creating a resource group. This is a container for all the pieces that you're creating. From here, you're creating a VM. One of the things I really like about Azure, having just recently started looking at it for MarkLogic 9, is they show you pricing, which I think is wonderful. So you get an idea of the different instances, how much they're going to cost you, and estimates for how much you'll be paying per month for each of them, and then what spec systems you're getting, which gives you a really nice idea about how you can size a test cluster and how much it's going to cost you if you're going to run it. So once you've chosen your instance, you choose your storage. In this case, we're just going to leave the defaults. And then from there, it runs through some final validation. And then once that's completed, validation's passed, and we can go through to purchase the system and take a note of the price per hour there. The notification will pop up. There's another feature that I really like. It gives you constant feedback about what it's doing at any time. And anyone who's familiar with Windows 10 has probably seen something a bit like this before, where you've got the panels that appear. And it's very much to the design of that particular interface. I think it's called Metro. So we've now got an IP address. So we can go ahead, copy it, and log into the MarkLogic instance. OK, you've probably all seen this before. In this case, we're doing the initial install, joining a cluster. In this case, it's the first host in the cluster. And then we're passing in our admin username and password. OK, and that's it. We've moved to a fully installed, configured 901.1 instance that's ready to load some data in. So let's load some data in. I'm going to go to port 8000 now, and to Query Console. There are some nice new features in MarkLogic 9 in Query Console, including type ahead. So as I load some documents in here, you'll see that there are some suggestions that come up. Which I find is a great feature, and it's probably been long overdue. I also love the fact now that it also gives you links to bits of the documentation, rather than having to have a separate tab to run through them. So we've run through, we've created 1,000 documents, and then you can see them here in the newly improved view for the Explorer there. There we go. So we've brought up our instance. And
how do you manage the forest? Oh, if I can.
Sorry?
How do you manage forest in that solution?
In this solution, you just create them as much as you would in a normal install. That's a clean, just vanilla install. So you don't create your forests afterwards.
Each node, there is one dnode, or you can.
In this configuration, I've not created any groups. So it's one host that will act as both a nenode and dnode. So this is a single instance. So it's processing requests, and we're loading data into the same instance. You could then go ahead and create extra groups. create one group for your evaluator nodes, and then create a group for your data nodes as well. And that would be something that you could certainly do. But that's, yeah, in this case, it's just a single instance that we're running. Okay, so we looked at resource groups earlier on very briefly. You can see here that this is the resource group that I created, and these are all the pieces of infrastructure that AWS creates for you. It also, much like CloudWatch on AWS, it gives you the stats, which is very, very useful. Again, anyone I think who's familiar with AWS will find this view very, very familiar. And it gives you essential information about all of the virtualized bits of hardware that you've got within your deployment container that you created. And this was all created as part of this video. This is all stuff that it didn't exist before I went through the process that I went to on screen here. These are the security groups, very, very similar setup again to AWS if you've watched the videos for installing and configuring the firewall rules and the routing tables for AWS as well. And then deleting is just as simple. Click on a deployed instance, go to the status page, and then hit delete. And very nicely, it asks you if you want to delete, and it goes through the process of deleting, and the notification very conveniently tells you it's successfully deleted as well. Isn't that lovely? Just one other thing we need to do now is the rest of the resource group instances won't be deleted, but probably for obvious reasons. You don't want your data necessarily to disappear. So they're all still there, so we're just going to go ahead and clean those up now as well, much the same way that we did with the last ones. So we click on delete, and then from there, type in the resource group name just to confirm that you do really want to delete them, and we're done. Okay.
Alex?
Yes.
What operating system is it based on?
Oh, the system I was just using there. At the moment, we only have templates for CentOS 7. We are going to be adding support for Windows very, very, very soon.
What about usage configuration? Is that already done with the templates, or is it?
With these ones, to be honest with you, I haven't actually looked at the configuration of these, so I'd need to check. My guess is almost certainly not. It's turned off. Yeah, I had a feeling it probably wasn't configured. Do you know if transparent huge pages are turned off?
Huge pages are, we have a huge page default. I thought it was that THP is off.
THP is off. Yeah. Okay, so you don't need to do that. Obviously, if you're using CentOS 7, you would normally need to disable transparent huge pages with this image. Okay, brilliant. It's definitely off on the image. Okay, brilliant. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, I must confess that wasn't something I'd looked at until so far. Sorry? 7. Yeah, I would honestly, I'd recommend using. I would just use CentOS 7. It's the best choice right now. I think. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's pretty easy to access, as you can see. There are going to be solution templates, which are much like the CloudFormation templates that we talked about. We don't have examples of those yet. They are coming soon. So at the moment, the deployment that I showed you will be able to get you up and running. But I understand that fairly soon, I think with 9.2 or 9.3, we should be bringing out some solution templates that are very, very similar to our CloudFormation templates. We are working closely with Azure as well. In a support partnership, which I'm very, very excited to be announcing as well. And we do have a quick start guide that is available in the new documentation that launched with MarkLogic 9 as well.
Can you just explain what the performance gain is over 1 to 3 nodes? Why?
Well, you've got 3 more hosts that can respond to requests. So,
I'm talking about what have you got? What is the gain?
Well, okay. So, if you think of a 3-node cluster being individual hosts that are all configured in exactly the same way. You've got 3 hosts that have a set of thread pools that they're managing for applications. So for first and foremost, you can then round robin requests across 3 sets of hosts. So you've got 3 hosts concurrently running running and dealing with requests. So that would be the first thing for applications. For data, spreading it across more of them means that you can have less documents over more forests spread across each of the hosts. If you've got a larger number of documents over more forests, you're going to get much, much faster responses back because the indexes are smaller versus one single host. You've got smaller sets of index entries, so they can be computed faster across 3 hosts. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Well, 1's going to give you 1, 2's going to give you a bit around about the same as 1, 3's going to give you about 2 equivalents. If I had 2 separate or 3 separate independent systems, they're all going to work independently. They will all do their own thing. Why would I cluster them together and have 3 all doing?
Well, okay, with 3 hosts, for example, most people will go with a configuration like that because they want to possibly entertain the risk of losing a host. So you can configure failover. You need at least 3 hosts for that, so you've got a winning side of a network partition in the event of there being any kind of issue. So you get failover is the first thing. Secondly, I think it depends on your application and your data. I would expect you to see excellent performance. I can't say whether it's 2 or 3x without knowing what your application is or what it's doing, because there are so many different uses for MarkLogic Server. Generally speaking, if you're spreading data over 3 hosts, requests are going to be a lot faster because you've got 3 hosts computing whatever the query is, answering the query against their view of that particular piece of data that's then aggregated on one of the hosts. And that shared nothing architecture works amazingly well across 3 hosts. And just the fact that you've got throughput for 3 HTTP stacks for your application, and then you can round robin requests between them, will give you a significant gain. It's very, very difficult to be able to give you a quote on whether it's 3 times better or not. Aaron, you putting your hand up then?
You've got HA. Otherwise, if you can get enough infrastructure on one host, you don't need HA.
Yeah.
One host 3 times larger. That's always going to be faster than 3 separate hosts.
There you go.
You're going to hit a limit at, once you go to 2 by 22 core, you're going to need more hosts.
And the other problem then is if you start adding other indexes, things like wildcard searches and near queries are pretty CPU intensive. So if you're running a large number of queries that are doing wildcarded searches, for example, I would imagine you'd get much better performance over 3 hosts with that data.
You can scale up. You can scale up, and you don't need HA, but it's seldom that customers don't need HA. Yeah.
There you go. Thanks, Aaron. Okay, so this is kind of a repetition of the other slide that we just showed you here. That's the Azure store there. The demo slide we've just seen here. So key takeaways. Cloud neutral from our point of view. We do have onboarding templates. As I say, you don't need to use these. We just offer them. So we've got the CloudFormation templates on the one hand that are fairly established, and then we've got the Azure solution templates on the other hand. We've got pretty good documentation at this point, and of course you do have access to the support team as well, should you need further assistance. In most cases, we found that we work pretty well if you open parallel cases with us and with Amazon, and I guess in future with Azure as well. We can help with both sides often, and they can Amazon are generally much better at helping with specific infrastructure issues, particularly when you start looking at setting up VPCs and so on.
Have you come across any performance differences between the two across Azure versus, in terms of some of the kind of hardware, effectively, the virtual hardware they're offering, or effectively seeing that the performance across both cloud platforms looks more or less as quick?
I don't think there's really much difference at all, to be honest. I think the quality of most of these, and I think the same would probably apply to Google Cloud as well. I think they're very, very close in terms of what they offer, what they charge, what you get, and the performance you can expect to get. Yeah. It's almost certainly going to be code on the application side that's slower, if that makes sense. So queries that are not necessarily that optimized that will cause the...
So MarkLogic doesn't implement one over the other?
No, not at all. What I would recommend is if you're starting out, look at AWS or Azure. If you want to go and look at another provider, we are here to help, and we will try to help, but you're probably in safer hands if you work with AWS or Azure. But from our point of view, no, go ahead and use whatever vendor you want, and we'll try to help you as best we can, but we can't promise we will be able to, because we can't support all of them.
On AWS and Azure solutions, so you have part of your forest here and part of your sphere?
You could set up an application where you replicate between hosts on both. I'd have thought pretty easily if that's what you're asking. So have part of you're saying have part of your app on AWS and then part of it on, yeah, I mean, from MarkLogic's point of view, it's not really going to care too much. So yeah, you could definitely do that if you wanted to. If you wanted to architect an application that has, say, an Azure cluster somewhere. And I'm not sure why you would want to do that, though, from a maintainability point of view, but...
I think it's absolutely a great reason to do it, which is to be able to, you don't really know that you're portable. It's like DR failover. You have to actually fail over. If you want to be resilient, abstract it away from dependency on particular cloud, the only way to ensure that you do it is actually run above.
So the only...
It's otherwise it's theoretical.
The only thing I can think of tied to that is, I mean, obviously, AWS has its own regions that are completely self-contained. Like everything is self-contained, right down to keys. So you could also just make sure you've got the application in 2 different regions, which would give you I would say quite a lot of flexibility. If you've got people who want to work with both, I mean, as you can see, there's not that much difference, I think, in terms of what you're viewing between AWS and Azure. I can't see that there'd be that much overhead, but there obviously is some because you're using 2 different cloud providers. There's different nomenclature, there's different groups of objects and so on. So it might be quite a bit to expect your team to support, if that makes sense. It's the only downside I can think of.
Question on migration strategy. Let's say we are using AWS and then for some reason, we need to switch to Azure. What do we need to do?
I would definitely go with replication for that, database replication. Set up your Azure cluster and just configure replication to use that as the foreign cluster and just let the data load in. That would by far be the easiest, simplest way of doing it. You could do backup and restore.
The replicated cluster becomes the master and
Yeah.
we keep the previous master.
Yeah, I mean, break replication at that point and then configure AWS as your master and, configure Azure as your master and you're done. And you could go back the other way really easily. That would definitely be the fastest way to do it. The other way is backup and restore. I mean, a trick that a lot of customers use is to run backups to S3 and then, create a new instance in AWS. And I don't quite know about the taking data from S3 to the Azure equivalent of it, but certainly from our point of view, I think replication is the easiest way to get the MarkLogic to manage that data movement between areas.
Is it still the recommendation that you run it on Linux if you can?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're getting closer now to, we're supporting, for example, we're now starting to support Windows more, but for a long time, the MarkLogic has been designed by engineers specifically sympathetic, I think, to Linux and the Linux kernel. It's quite easy to debug on, and it's kind of it's good to work with. So we've probably paid more attention in the past to the Linux kernel. But I've got to say, I think particularly in recent releases, our Windows builds are really quite solid now. Although there have been some issues in the past, should we say? But you can use either. But I'd personally go with Linux. More customers use it, so safety in numbers.
Version 9 is supported on Windows.
Yes, we don't have images for it yet, but they are coming. So watch this space. This is a fairly new announcement, so it's kind of breaking news from our point of view. But yes, certainly use either. Feel free to use either. And I've run out of time, so thank you. Sorry, Harriet. Very good. All right.
Just before you do leave.
Oh.
Working? Yeah, it is. Great. Yeah, just a quick reminder, if you can provide us with that feedback, that'd be really great for us. Obviously, on the application, you can also choose your next sessions and look at your personalized agenda. For those of you who did come a bit late, if you don't mind just getting your badge scanned by Harriet. And if you do have any questions on this topic, we are running expert one-on-one sessions next door in the Flowers room, and you can meet with Patrick, who can then get a slot for you to talk about those topics. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Yeah, you can also open a support case if you want to ask us questions about cloud as well, so feel free.